Hello and welcome back to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. It is Sunday night. Mr. Mark Daly, Mr. Mark Hamilton bringing you a very special and unique episode of the show. Mark, first of all, before we get into it, how was your weekend? How did you enjoy that very, shall we say, eventful Grand Prix?
I thoroughly enjoyed the outcome. Put it that way. I had a minute of panic. I had a minute of fear, and I'll share this and people will listen to this in a couple of minutes, but I didn't actually see the quote-unquote, as you put it, the incident live. I went to the washroom, came back, and saw a car on top of another car, and as soon as I saw it, I had this horrible, desperate, sinking feeling that we were going to revisit that experience of the 2 weeks out of Silverstone. Fortunately, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but the outcome of the race was fantastic. We had redemption for Ricciardo. We had a revenge drive all weekend for Valtteri Bottas, and the championship is still wide open, which I think is all that really matters at the end of the day. We just want to see a title fight, two title fights that go down to the very last lap of the very last race. And as every weekend passes, it seems more and more like that's going to happen.
Yeah, which is bizarre because, I mean, I think going back to even the first couple of races of the season, we kept saying even then, well, let's just hope that this battle keeps going on throughout the rest of the year. And so far to date, it's proven that way. I mean, there's been more than I think any of us expected, controversy this year. We've had it in bucket loads. Of course, we've seen lots of it again today, and I'm sure that will be the hot topic over the next several days. I'm sure we'll have plenty of updates come Thursday night when we do the regular weekly show. But we wanted to actually kind of tee this one up because we're going to transition here away from just the two of us. We actually sat down with our really good friend Tim Hauraney from TSN Sports, that is. He invited us onto his show, the TSN Racing Pod, a little earlier this evening, and Tim has kindly agreed to share the audio with us so we could cross post it here on our channel as well so you guys could listen to it, because we were going to come back and record a separate show, but Tim's been on our program a couple of times and we love the insight and the knowledge and everything that Tim brings to the table. We thought, well, if we come back and do something that's 30 minutes long or 45 minutes long and just kind of wrap it up, we didn't feel like we'd be doing the race and the whole entire weekend justice, because the discussion that we had with the three of us with Tim Hauraney was just that good. So this is it in its entirety. And if you want to follow Tim, you can find him on Twitter at Tim Hauraney. And if you want to check out all of his work, you can do that by going to tsn.ca/TSN-racing-pod. And you can find Tim's feed there, and you can search him up on all the podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, all those good places. Mark, anything you want to say, or should we just hand it over to, well, kind of hand it back to ourselves and Tim, of course, but it was a real pleasure talking to Tim.
I think I'm good. I hope everybody enjoys the show. It was kind of a last minute thing. Tim had reached out to us a couple of days ago and said, hey, do you want to collab on Sunday? And for us, it was a debate about, do we record a show with Tim about the Grand Prix and then do another ourselves afterwards, or do we just share the original show? So the decision was that if we came back and we're tired and we're rehashing the same subject matter again, it would be doing this audience a bit of a disservice, and you deserve better. So we're going to post that. And then, of course, we'll be back to our normal routine this coming Thursday. We'll be dropping our regularly weekly show. We have a ton of listener questions and mailbag that I've been promising that we would be getting to, some since the summer break. So I promise you, if you've been waiting to hear your question, we're hoping to deliver it on Thursday. But aside from that, Mark, I don't know if you agree, but I thought the show with Tim was fantastic. And I think our listeners are really going to enjoy it.
Yeah, me too. And I'm kind of looking forward to getting back to doing what we always do. Looking forward to getting to those mailbag questions, and getting back to what we've typically kind of built up to be our regular program. So, anyways, without further ado, we're going to hand it over to Tim Hauraney and the TSN Racing Pod. Hope you guys enjoy. Of course, if you want to get in touch with us, by all means do so at Scootery F1 Pod on Twitter. Any comments always welcome there, as well via email at scooteryf1pod@gmail.com. Take it away, Mr. Hauraney.
Welcome to TSN Racing Pod, everyone. I'm your host, Tim Hauraney. If you want more Racing Pod, you can get it at tsn.ca/tsn-racing-pod. If you want more from me, you can get me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Tim Hauraney. Big show tonight. We're taping this on a Sunday evening following the Italian Grand Prix, what was a wild race. And here to help me break it all down are the boys from the Scuderia F1 podcast. Mark Daly and Mark Hamilton. What's going on, Marks?
Well, hey, Tim, a question. How many hours do we have to break this race down? I feel we're going to be here for a while.
We go as long as we want, buddy. As long as we want. I got 3 gigabytes on my computer now. I got 3 gigabytes saved up for this.
Oh, man, what a perfect... So, for starters, thank you for having us on. We saw the invite a couple of days ago. Incredibly excited. For those of you that don't know, we've done some really great work with Tim. He came on our show during the summer, did a really great F1 2022 primer, one of the best received episodes we've ever done. I think we've done some stuff going back even to the beginning of 2020 pre-pandemic, but man, you couldn't have invited us on for a better show. So we're super excited to be here.
This was just perfect, right? It just fell at the right time with the right race. And we got extremely lucky with this one. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. First time at Monza since 2019. They had fans. What was it, 50% capacity, I believe, and you can tell by the roar of the crowd that it felt like more than a 50% capacity.
Yeah, it was great to see. I mean, Monza is one of those great F1 tracks. I mean, with the Tifosi there, it's always a great atmosphere, especially, I mean, you go back to 2019 when Charles won that race, fending off both of the Mercedes for the entire race. That was an epic Grand Prix. Last year was a great race as well for, similar mayhem to what we saw today, but it was bizarre in the middle of the pandemic and nobody there. And today was a little bit more normal. And when we saw the incident unfold, which we're going to get to, obviously, I mean, that place just lit up. I mean, you could hear it clearly through the TV, and all those people that were sitting down by the chicane, I'm sure they had all their phones out. We're taking lots of pictures. It was incredible.
I'll just add as well, because we talked about this a little bit earlier this week on Twitter, but thank goodness we have Italy in the middle of a pandemic. Thank goodness we have a country with 3 FIA grade 1 circuits that we can lean into. And incredibly, this is, I think, now the 5th time we've raced a Formula One Grand Prix in that country in a little over a year. But this is really the first meaningful time, to Tim's point, that we've had fans. And even if it was 50% capacity, the atmosphere was absolutely palpable, and it was great to see.
Yeah, it was nothing like Zandvoort, what we saw last weekend, but it was still pretty good. I like how they were getting the DJ out for this one and trying to get the fans all hyped up. That's a little bit new, I think, for Monza. I don't ever remember them having like a big DJ to try and get everybody amped up, because I think they're probably learning from how successful the Netherlands were, right?
Well, I think if you have Chesto at the Grand Prix and also have him waving the checkered flag, I think you're almost bound to do something. So I mean, the Italians have style; they know how to throw a party. So I'm sure they made a couple of notes after Zandvoort last week for sure.
All right, let's dive right in head first. And obviously, we have to start with the incident between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. And guys, I mean, first off, let's see where we're going to assess blame, because there's been a lot of that going on lately, especially online on Twitter. It's fun. You should check it out. It's interesting. It's an interesting space. So, Mark H., let's start with you.
I was afraid you were going to go there. So my opinion continues to evolve. And I have to be careful as well, because going back 3, 4, 5 months, Mark and I were plastered with this title of being Red Bull homers. And it seemed a little bit unfair, but every week we get these messages like, I'm going to stop following you. You guys are too pro Red Bull. You're too pro Horner. Silverstone comes around and that narrative completely shifts, which is you guys are so pro Lewis, you're so pro Toto, you're so team LH. But I was kind of the mind after this one that you kind of have to take the outcome, which is ultimately, and we'll talk about the halo a little bit later. The outcome ultimately was they both DNF. You have Max's car sitting on top of Lewis's car with the actual contact itself. You have to kind of look at those two things in isolation. And to me, I look at this, I review it, and then I kind of, in my head, kind of tried to flash back to the last couple of years of Formula One. And ultimately, I don't know that what Max did here was particularly egregious. And I would have been cool if this was left as a racing incident. And we can talk about the findings of the stewards, who ultimately argued that, hey, look, we're going to assess blame here. We're going to assess the 3-place grid penalty because ultimately he wasn't alongside him. He had no right to make that move. But ultimately, I would have been comfortable with this as a racing incident because I don't want to be in a position where we're discouraging drivers from making that move. Now, that said, we've seen incidents even this year. If you flash back to T4 at Imola on the opening lap in the wet, if you look at Barcelona, we've seen very similar instances this year where Hamilton was in the opposite position and he ultimately backed off and gave that space to Max. So for Max to suggest, hey, I didn't have enough space, he squeezed me, he pushed me onto the curbs, seems a little bit hypocritical. I'm cool with the penalty. I would have been equally as cool if they'd left this as a racing incident, but it's good to see that we're starting to see maybe a little bit of consistency from the stewards, but I'm dying to hear where you guys kind of fell on this.
Yeah, I'll pick it up here if you don't mind, Tim. But yeah, much like Mark, my opinion over the day has kind of evolved. I thought at the time it was maybe 50-50. I thought maybe that Lewis pinched him a little bit, but I've gone back and I've watched the replay and all the different angles of it multiple times to really try and understand it as best I can. Unfortunately, no one camera seemed to capture the whole thing in one shot. So you kind of have to watch it multiple times to really get a good feel of it. But I mean, let's not forget that Max was only in that position because he had a horrible pit stop of, I think it was 11 or 11 and a half seconds that dropped him that far back. But anyways, Lewis went for his pit stop and he's coming out. And of course, he's got to stay within that white line, coming back onto the track after exiting the pit lane before he can come and really pull back onto the racing line. But the thing was, he was far enough ahead of Max. And I guess Max's thought at that time was, if I maybe go a little bit deep into this corner, I can edge in front of him into the corner and take the racing line away from him. And Lewis, obviously, he was further ahead when they came to the corner. Obviously, he was on the line, and Max, I think he just misjudged it. Much like Mark, I think you could have gone either way with it, but I think just based on the fact of what we saw at Silverstone a couple of weeks ago, that the stewards ultimately decided to go with a 3-place or the penalty with Lewis. I think that they did the same thing, and I think that just from a consistency point of view, I think it was the right call. I would have been fine either way. But I'm kind of glad that, after complaining earlier in the year about different things from the stewards at this time, that there was consistency at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make, Mark, because that's one of the things that was really going to bug me if something hadn't have gotten done in the stewards' room following the race on Sunday, because I like to see consistency from the stewards. And I feel in the past, we've never really truly had that. And now we're kind of getting it, which is good. It's good to see.
Absolutely.
Now, it's kind of like, now you need to think about it like the harshness of the penalty. Like, was 3 places enough? Should it have been more? You know what I mean? So we have to start thinking about, those things as well. I think 1 or 2, like a 2-place grid penalty or something like that, would have been good. I would have been good with that. 3, I feel, is just a little bit too harsh. If we look back at what happened with Verstappen and Lewis in Silverstone, Lewis ended up getting a 10-second penalty, time penalty, right? And he still went on to get points, lots of points. And Max ended up being slammed with a 50, whatever it was like a 50 plus G impact or something like that, along those lines. And then Lewis just gets 10-second penalty, right? So for this one, I don't know. I just feel that it was a little bit too harsh. I think 3 was probably too much. I put the blame on Verstappen. I do. Only, Actually, I shouldn't say it like that, but there's plenty of blame to go around between both drivers. And both drivers do have a role to play in what's happening out on the racetrack at all times. Could Lewis have given him a little bit more room heading into turn 1? Yes. Did Lewis give him enough room heading into turn 2? Yes, because he missed the apex. Could Max have pulled out of it heading into turn 2? Yes, he could have, easily, right? You have left foot brake, right foot gas. These things stop on a dime. Max sees a sausage curb coming. All he needs to do is tap on that brake real quick, concede the corner to Lewis, and then try and get him in the second chicane.
Yeah.
Which is probably what he should have done at the end of the day, because at the end of it, you're fighting for championship. And this could have been a race that Max might have been able to win, or at least beat Lewis and just widen that points gap just a tiny bit more, right? Because we have to remember, Max is going to have to take an engine penalty at some point. Now he's got slapped with this grid penalty, so he's probably going to end up taking this engine penalty in Russia, I assume. You're going to lose points to Lewis. You're going to a track now in Russia that Mercedes has always dominated at. They've always been great there. Yep. And now Lewis is probably, well, not probably, I shouldn't get ahead of myself on this one, but he has a very good chance of taking a championship lead coming out of Russia. Instead, Max decides, I'm going to stuff one down the inside here. I'm going to hit this sausage curb, which he knows he's going to hit. And he knows, like, just how severe those sausage curbs are. If you did the track walk, you know it. He's raced on this track for many years. I've raced on that track. I know how aggressive those curbs are. And you know you can't hit them. You just can't. It damages the car. So at the end of the day, I think that just Max just was a little bit too aggressive, guys. I really do just feel that. I don't know. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think the stage for this was actually set on the opening lap going into the second chicane when they basically were side by side. Lewis tried to tried to put a move on Max there, and Max, he was ahead going into that corner, and Lewis immediately on the radio saying, "Oh, he squeezed me," which I thought was a bit of BS. But I thought that little incident there, even though it didn't amount to anything, it reminded me, I thought it was very 2018 going back to Lewis and Sebastian Vettel at that very same corner, except in that race, Vettel went off the track, and that had in that year, that had very big implications for the championship as well.
Tim, I have to ask you a question. This is one of the reasons that I love having conversations with you, because obviously Daly and I, we've been watching and we've been passionate about the sport for decades, and combined, we've watched hundreds of Grand Prix. You have a different perspective because you've been in that open wheel racing car, and you can relate to some of these situations in a way that we can't. From your perspective, if you were in Max's position, knowing what those curbs look like, do you lift? Do you give Hamilton room? If you're Hamilton, do you give him a little bit more space and push to the outside? Like, from your position, if you're in each of those situations, how do you react? And then on top of that, how should the FIA have called this? Did they call it correctly? Because I think prior to maybe the last few incidents, it's kind of hit or miss. Like, you know what? Sometimes you don't have the space. You're not aligned. We're going to let it go. It's going to be a racing incident. And Daly, you made that great point earlier, which is the value here is that they called a penalty on Hamilton at Silverstone for doing something similar. Although you could argue he was farther aside Verstappen than Verstappen was Lewis here. But Tim, from your perspective, how do you react in each of those situations? And how should the FIA call a penalty in a situation like this?
Yeah, I think starting with the FIA, I mean, like we were saying off the top, it's good that they're being consistent, right? I think that's the one thing that drivers get so frustrated with, is when the consistency really does fall by the wayside, where it's like, okay, if you're going to give a guy a penalty for that, you better do it again if it happens again later on. Because if you're not doing it, then drivers tend to lose confidence in what race control, the FIA do, and then they start worrying about their safety a little bit too, and then you start getting pushback from the GPDA, and then it turns into a bit of it starts snowballing. So at the end of the day, I'm glad that the race officials were consistent. I'm glad they did hand out a penalty at the end of the day. Now, as a driver, if you're battling for a championship, and if I'm Max Verstappen, I'm pulling out of that. I'm not going to try and stuff it down the inside, crash the car, cost more money. You're already getting close to the threshold of the salary cap. At the same time, you're going to have to take an engine penalty somewhere as well. And all of these things just add up. Like, it adds up at the end of the season. And this is why, Lewis is such a genius tactician. He is like a freaking surgeon when it comes to the season, right? He slices and dices you as this season kind of goes along. And then after summer break, he really hits you hard. And that's kind of like what we're starting to see a bit here with this race that we just saw today in Italy. So you have to be careful when you're going up against a 7-time world champion. This guy is 7-time world champion. He's one of the greatest Formula One drivers of all time. You can't be thinking about selfish reasons at that moment in the race. You have to think logically, right? You have to take emotion out of it. Yes, you had whatever it was, an 11-second pit stop. Big deal. Get back out on track, move your ass, and make the time up, right? Now, if I'm Lewis and I'm coming down into this corner, I probably would have squeezed Max a little bit going in just to let him know, like, hey, you're not going to get the corner that easy, right? At the same time, once we get to the second apex, I'm probably starting to think like I need to give this guy a bit more room, because if I feel because Lewis may not have seen him at that moment. And I know like the analysts on Sky Sports and everything are like, yeah, like, he can see him in the mirror. He knows he's there or whatever. I'm like, sometimes you can't. Like sometimes the only thing that lets you know, you can just feel the other driver there. You can feel something's beside you. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that that's kind of like what Lewis was feeling in that moment. It was just like, yeah, he's still there. He's still around. I don't know how much room I need to give him, but he's still kind of there. So I'll give him a tiny bit of space, which he does because he misses the apex completely. I probably would have done the same as what Lewis did for sure.
You know, Tim, one question I had for you from again, from a driver's standpoint is just how wide is the track at that corner? Because it's not a 90-degree turn. It's more like 110, maybe 120 degrees. I mean, they're really turning back on themselves and then turning again to the left. I guess my question is, do you think that maybe that track is too narrow for these Formula One cars? I mean, with such a drastic angle?
Yeah. I think so. I think going into because I've raced there, I mean, like turn 1 and 2, that first chicane is extremely tight. It's so tight, and like the TV just doesn't really do it justice of how kind of narrow it is, and it's extremely hard. And we've seen it before, guys, trying to get two cars side by side through there. It never works out. It never works out. It just doesn't. Not unless you're going to make sure the wheels are placed at the right angles on the car. Both of you can kind of dance your way through it without touching, which seldom happens. It's extremely tight right there. What they probably should have done, and I was thinking about this at the start of the race weekend, was move the DRS back. Like the DRS wasn't starting until halfway down the front straightaway. Like, why isn't it starting as soon as they get out of Parabolica? Like, why is it not starting there? Like, that makes zero sense. Like, and then the same point, why is there no DRS heading into Parabolica? Right? I understand that you need the brakes to activate the DRS, and those guys aren't really braking heading into Parabolica, but like having a DRS there will put some emphasis on them having to brake a little bit, and that might open some opportunity for some more passing in there as well. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like it. I was so blown away by that, and we probably would have seen more on-track action, and we'll get to the sprint race later, but we probably would have seen more on-track action if they had done, something like that.
Yeah, that's some great insight.
One last thing I'll add as well, and this is such a great topic, but what I've seen I think what we've all seen from Max the last couple of years is he's aggressive, Tim, like you said. Yeah. And even if there isn't space, oftentimes he'll dive into those corners knowing that another driver is going to back off, is going to give him space, and he's got the opportunity to take the corner. What Max did today is very similar to what Lewis regularly did to Nico in 2014 and 2015. And I remember at the time, everyone's screaming, Nico, hold your line. And it really wasn't until 2016 when he started holding his line. And all of a sudden, the two of them kept coming together, just like in Spain, which is probably one of the kind of intra-team crashes that none of us will ever forget.
No.
Where was the other one? The other one was in the Red Bull Ring.
Yes.
When Lewis was on a fresh set of tires, it was the last lap, and he hunted down Rosberg. Rosberg was leading, and I don't know what the hell Nico was thinking. Like,
he was going into turn 3 there, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, but
right
it was
at the top.
Like I put that one on him. Like, that was his fault. Like, what are you doing? Give it to him, because he's quicker than you are at this point. He's got better tires. Like, what are you supposed to do? And at the same time, he's trying to lead a championship, right? Takes himself out of the race. I think, like, what did Lewis, like, 3-wheeled it around the course and finished, like, whatever it was, second or third or something like that. It was ridiculous. Anyways, but yeah, good old racing stories. But Christian Horner had some stories at the end of the race with the racing. He's calling this a racing incident. Yeah, I think all of us agree that I don't think it was a racing incident. I think Max probably could have avoided it for sure. And Christian Horner has done such a great job this off-season, particularly off the track with off-track politics. Don't you think, guys?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is something. No, I was just going to say this is something I'm going to back this up and share a little bit of a personal story today. So watching the Grand Prix, it starts at 6 a.m. Pacific time. My philosophy today was, look, I'll get up, I'll watch the first couple of laps. If it looks like it's settling in, I'm going back to bed. I'll get it up at 8 and I'll watch it on the app from the start. And it was kind of exciting from the beginning. And the fact that there was an unexpected leader early on was something that kept me tuned in. But I actually went to the washroom at one point. And when I came back, I glanced at my screen and Max's car was perched on top of Lewis Hamilton's car. And the first thing that came to my mind was the fallout, the 2 weeks of fallout after Silverstone. And it was, to your point, it was the politics, it was the charade, it was the public statements. And you're right. He's been very tactical and very aggressive, but I couldn't stomach the idea of another 2 weeks of that leading up to Russia. And I think when I heard his comments saying, hey, it was a racing incident, I'm like, aha, he's conceding fault and he's conceding error here in a way that he absolutely wasn't willing to do at Silverstone. And I think he was willing to concede it was a racing incident because he probably recognized that Max was probably a little bit more at fault, but this is the most generous concession of that you're probably going to get out of him. But you're right. The way that he plays the media and the statements and the propaganda PR machine that kind of spools up, to kind of steal a turbo metaphor, that spools up on the Red Bull side is very interesting. And it's been in full force this year. Yeah,
he's very good at choosing his words and twisting the narrative to fit what he's trying to say.
Absolutely.
I was on a Zoom call with Total Wolf following the race, and I liked his analogy of the tactical foul, but one of the things that he did say that I found quite interesting was that if these two don't figure out a way of racing against each other, then this will just keep happening. And it'll get to the point where someone will get, and I'm paraphrasing this end part, but it's at some point where one of them is going to get hurt. Yeah. Because these cars are moving way faster than we've ever seen them before, right, Mark?
Well, I mean, going back to what you said earlier, Tim, about the incident, the accident at Silverstone several weeks ago. I mean, Max in that 51G crash or whatever, totaling the car. And then today, Lewis, getting, I mean, the halo saved him. I mean, without the halo, Lewis would be in really, really bad shape tonight. I mean, you see all those still pictures that been circulating after the Grand Prix of Lewis's head being smashed forward as Max's right rear tire hits him on the back of the helmet. I mean, it's just scary, scary stuff. And that's the thing, right? If they don't find a way to race together and draw the line somewhere, then at some point, I mean, the law of averages is going to catch up and somebody's going to get seriously, seriously hurt. And that scares me. That really scares me. Where did
things change? Because I agree with everything both of you are saying. The concern is that if this continues on, there's going to be a crash and somebody's not going to walk away. They're going to have to be carted away because they're injured, they're hurt. But if you flash back 2.5 months, everything people were talking about was, look how much professional courtesy they're showing. Max has matured. He's not making those dive bomb efforts into corners. He's not being egregious with his decision making. It was so funny that for the first 8 or 9 races of the season, they're showing each other respect. Max has matured in a way that we maybe didn't expect to see this year. And then ever since maybe Great Britain, maybe Austria, in fact, that whole dynamic's changed. And maybe it's because the championship tightened up. Maybe it's because half of the calendar had moved away. But Tim, like Mark, what changed that we went from a world where it was rainbows and unicorns and pony and candy to nuclear warfare between these two teams and these two drivers?
Well, I'm going to defer to the former, the professional race driver here. I'm going to let Tim take this one.
I think Silverstone is maybe an example of where I think things started to change because, Mark H., like you brought up some great points with Imola, Spain, where Lewis conceded, right? And he gave that position up only to know that, hey, I got to live to fight another day.
It's a marathon.
And one of the things that Lewis has been saying since, he's been saying the exact same thing for the last few years, is that you always have to give Max space. You have to always leave him the space. And that's one of the only drivers he's ever said that about. And I find that really, really interesting because to me, that makes it seem like he's extremely aggressive and you have no clue what you're going to get from this guy. Mm-hmm. And so coming into Silverstone, the two of them on that opening lap, Max was, it's fair to say, and I see if we all agree on this, in that opening lap at Silverstone, do you guys all agree that Max was being pretty friggin' aggressive?
Yeah, no question,
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah.
And I think for Lewis, he'd had enough. And heading towards whatever it was, Cops, I think he was like, the hell with this. I'm gonna stuff this in here and I'm gonna see what happens because I've had enough of this crap. And it was just enough. Things happened at the right moment, the right time. Lewis was going to be assertive and aggressive at that moment as well, and it kind of backfired. Right? Yeah. But at the same time, Max wasn't giving him the space. So, is there a lesson to be learned for Max in that moment? I mean, maybe. I've never really seen Lewis be too aggressive with other drivers when out on the racetrack. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I've never really seen him be. Oh, I think he's fair. I think he's fairly fair when it comes to racing wheel to wheel.
Yeah,
I like what you're saying.
And I think with Max, it's kind of just like I've had enough. Like,
I completely agree. And I think what you're saying, and what you're not saying is we liked, and that what Hamilton was trying to do was stuff Max into the wall. That's not what he was trying to do. But to your earlier point, there have been a couple incidents this year where Lewis decided to give him space. But I think it got to the point in the championship in Great Britain, especially with how aggressive Max was being on that first lap, where Lewis is like, I have to make a statement. Sooner or later, I need to make a statement to him that he can't run me off the track and he's not going to dominate the racing line in every single corner. If this is going to be a championship and we're going to fight for a chip, I've got to be a little bit more aggressive. And I think that was a statement moment. And I think there was some shock and awe from the Red Bull team that he had done that, because I think Max is accustomed to people giving him space. They know he's aggressive. They know he's not going to back off. They don't want the consequences of contact, which you spoke to earlier, which is the cost, potential injury, having to kind of burn through your engine or your exhaust allocation, whatever the case may be. And I think Lewis made a statement, and obviously it wasn't the statement he intended to make. It ended up being far more dramatic, but I think that's exactly right. He just drew a line in the sand and said, I have to make a statement now or never.
Yeah. Well, I think Max at this point has to realize that if you're going to dish it out, you should expect to have it come back and come back at you at some point as well, right? I mean, some guys might not be as aggressive or willing to stick their nose in there, but I mean, if you're Lewis Hamilton, why not? It's like, do you have to sit back and take this from this guy?
And I wonder if at some point or another, either Toto and Christian somehow start chatting with each other about, we need to get these two into a room and just have them sort out how they're going to race each other, because it's costing us a ton of money. And it's going to keep costing them money. Like there are, like I was saying, like I believe what happens once they start going over the salary cap threshold, they have a limit of, I believe, don't quote me on it, it's like 3.5 to 4 million buffer over it that they can go. But they have to request it to be an exemption for special circumstances. And so once the damage starts piling up here for both of these teams, you have to make a decision, like, how aggressive are we going to be moving forward, because we need to save some money so we can focus on the 2022 car, right? And so if you're racking up cars, you're never going to be able to produce the 2022 car you want, and you might go over that threshold of the salary cap. And so they're going to have to talk. Like, I just think they're going to have to sit down and figure out how they're going to race each other, or else we're just going to keep seeing this over and over again, because neither one of these guys are going to give way or give up or back down, right? I mean, like, obviously Lewis is going for his 8th world championship, and it's not going to happen. And Max is trying to score his first. And, thankfully we had the halo today. Because guys, I don't know, if we didn't have the halo today, I think we might be talking about something else.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Tim. I mean, I don't mind saying that when it sort of was floated out there a couple of years ago that they wanted to see it in Formula One, I wasn't too keen on it, but I mean, it was pretty well proven in short order that it was the right thing to do at the right time. And, just, my own selfish reasons or, I guess aesthetic preferences, was my main, I guess, reason behind the stance that I had. But I mean, I'm glad that they introduced it. I mean, it was proven right away with Charles Leclerc and Fernando at Spa that year when they had their, coming together at La Source, and, we saw all the tire marks on helmets and the halo and everything like that. And it's proven to, that it has literally been a lifesaver in several circumstances or instances since, and today as well. And I mean, like you say, Tim, I mean, if they didn't have it, there's a very good chance that we were talking about something extremely horrible this evening.
Mark, I like that term you use as well, aesthetic preference, because I felt the same way. I remember the FIA Formula One, they started talking about this pre-Liberty. This was something that was being discussed long before Liberty came into the picture. I remember seeing in person a halo being tested on a 2016 spec car during the 2016 season in person. I just like, that is horrendous. And in my mind, I just didn't like it because I didn't like the look. And I started trying to rationalize my distaste for it by saying, well, it's not going to be good for the drivers. It's going to hurt their already limited visibility. Of course, there was a bit of an exemption and they didn't land it in time for the 17th season. And of course, they introduced it in 2018 to a little bit of fanfare. But ultimately, I think we can very confidently say, and I'm known to use a lot of hyperbole and to exaggerate, but I don't think there's any question that it saved Grosjean's life last year in Bahrain. I don't think there's any question it saved his life. You look at the photos of that crash scene and it saved his life. You just look at the way it pushed that fencing, that barricade out of the way. And even today, it was less the fact that you had Max's rear wheel sitting on top of the halo, but it was the seconds before that where the halo pushes apart the floor and the engine cover and the side pod on Max's car. Like that just peels away because it comes into contact with the halo. If the halo's not there, that's Lewis's head. And I think Tim's right. We're having a very different conversation today, and we would be talking about the future of this sport and whether it had a future because of what we've seen today. And I know that there's some reporting that came out within the last hour or so. It's saying even with the halo, and I'm not saying we need to improve it because I think it's really great, but hey, it sounds like Lewis has started experiencing some neck issues. He might go and see a specialist. There's a lot of pain there, which is just the right thing to do. And if you're Mercedes, you need to protect your asset, your people capital. But thank goodness we had the halo today for the second time in a year.
So I mentioned that specialist part on SportsCenter this afternoon because I was on a Zoom with Lewis, and so because we were talking about this, and he was telling us
scooping Tim's scoop.
Yeah, I was like, I was going to say, like, where the hell did you read this, Hamilton? No, he was. We were on the Zoom with him, and he was explaining that once sort of the adrenaline wore off, he started to feel more pain in the neck, and it started to get actually tighter because he's never had a race car, land on top of his head in all the years that he's raced. Right, he's never really had that happen. And he was mentioning that he was going to see a specialist before Russia, so he could just make sure that everything was okay, and he was going to get the all clear to go ahead and race in Russia, which is actually a smart thing to do. I mean, at the end of the day, like neck injuries in F1 they happen quite often, and some of these drivers, I mean, myself in particular has had some, and they kind of just happen and you don't really know. And so to get yourself checked out is probably the right move. And yeah, I think Lewis will be okay, but at the end of the day, it's a smart move by him. We want to prolong that career of his. So Ricciardo, it's been a while, guys. 2018, his last win, right? And Redemption
Return
Day.
of the shoey.
Yeah, there's Redemption Day. There's Redemption Day in Monaco back in 2018, and there's Redemption Day in McLaren. So, I mean, what did you guys think about this? I was absolutely stoked when he crossed the finish line.
You first.
Regardless if Max and Lewis didn't finish this race, I think that there was going to be a good chance that one or both McLarens were going to finish on that podium regardless. I was shocked, guys, honestly, that neither Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen had any answer. I mean, I know Lewis had a couple of goes at Lando and had a little bit of success there, but Max could just not make an impression on Daniel Ricciardo. And I was absolutely speechless when I saw the speed that they had, and I was just so pumped. I thought it was a great story, and as great as I thought it was to see Ricciardo win this one, I have to admit that if either of one of the McLaren drivers won a race this year, I thought it would have been Lando, just based on the fact that Danny's struggled in the car a little bit. He just didn't look good in the last couple of races, and Lando's been the guy in form. But it was awesome to see a 1-2, and I mean, just the emotion on the pit wall at the checkered flag, and just hugs and high fives, and just just the pure joy. I mean, this is a long time coming for a once great team that fell on really, really hard times. I mean, you go back to the Honda era with like Fernando just 5-6 years ago. I mean, I was wondering, is there any way back for this team? So they've recovered really well. I think Zach Brown has done a phenomenal job appointing key people in the right positions, and then just letting them get down to work, and then assembling a pretty strong driver lineup, not just this year, but even last year with Lando and Carlos Sainz.
Half jokingly, I tweeted out earlier today that I was going to spend the next 6 hours going back and editing our last 6 months of podcasts to remove all the Daniel Ricciardo slander. But my goodness, it was absolutely thrilling to watch. It was an amazing feel-good story. And I think what was really special about this is, and let me just clarify, a Grand Prix win is a Grand Prix win. It doesn't matter how it happens. A GP win is a GP win. It is a monumental achievement for the driver and a team. And I think sometimes we take it for granted simply because we've seen certain drivers win over and over and over again. But I think what was really special about this one is he surges out into the front of the pack on the first lap. And there's nothing to me to suggest he wasn't going to hold that regardless of what happened with Lewis and Max when they came together. So I thought that was fantastic. And it's really, really, really amazing because I remember going back to Monaco, and I remember that was the lap where he was, I think he was lapped, or that was the race he was lapped by his teammate Lando Norris. But I remember him being interviewed, and he said at that time, and he was beaten down and he was defeated. But he made this comment that really struck with me, which is Lando had been sharing his telemetry and his data, and he was openly admitting, it's like, I don't understand how he's braking so late going into the corners. And I don't understand how he's carrying so much speed into those corners. Like, I'm an accomplished Formula One racer. I've won Grand Prix. I've raced with multiple teams, multiple power units, multiple drivetrains. And I can't put it together. And I was worried, and I felt he was going to start putting together a better campaign. I didn't necessarily anticipate that he was going to win a race, but I just didn't believe deep down that over the course of the winter break, he could forget how to drive a Formula One car. That maybe this was that, hey, I'm adjusting to a new team, a new culture, a new chassis. And for the first time in his life, he was driving a Mercedes powered car, because previously with Renault and with Red Bull, it had always been that Renault power unit that he's kind of consistently familiar with. But an amazing feel-good story, not just for him, Norris's best finish ever, and for the entire team McLaren. Fantastic story, and is something that I think I will remember for a very, very long time.
Yeah, me too.
I think one of the more telling things for me is when Ricciardo said, deep down, I never lost faith or belief. Well, he may have never lost faith or belief, but I know 100% he lost confidence. Had to have.
Absolutely.
And I've had to have, because I know, like you just said, when he had issues trying to match Lando Norris on the brake pedal, that was a definite sign to me, because Ricciardo is like Lewis Hamilton. He's one of the best late breakers in the sport that we have right now. And so if he can't figure that part of it out, I know there's something going on there, and it's not good. There were times this season where he was a second and more off the pace of Lando Norris. And that's a disaster, guys. That's an absolute disaster. It's not like it's 0.2 or 3 or maybe half a tenth. That's over a second, which is a lifetime for these guys as professional Formula One drivers. So leaving Red Bull, I think going to Renault, struggling in 2019, having a decent 2020, decides to leave Renault, then you switch over to another new team in McLaren. You have a whole other process that people don't really understand of learning mechanics, getting comfortable with the crew, and then trying to get comfortable with the race car that you're not comfortable with and trying to meet your teammates' driving style, which is extremely hard to do. It's very hard to do that. For Daniel Ricciardo to do what he did today, that's a legit win. Like, this was legit. Like, it wasn't like he got handed a victory. He went out and he won this race. And for all of the people out there, and I'm not saying you guys, but for everyone else who's out there saying that, you know, questioning Daniel Ricciardo's talent, I think today he just told everybody to shut the hell up. And he went out there and got this win, which is absolutely incredible. This was an awesome day for him. I think it's great for the team because it feels like they never lost confidence in him, even though when you get a driver like this who has that much talent, but then you see how far they've been off the pace of their teammate, teams tend to lose confidence in the other drivers, right, guys? Like, we've seen this before in the past. This isn't a new story where teams start losing faith in their driver, and then the next season they're gone. Right? We've seen it tons of times. So for Ricciardo, I'm happy for him that he was able to bounce back and get this victory because it was well deserved. And the podium celebrations, I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely loved them. I can watch Zach Brown chug shoeies all day.
Yeah, he's now I guess an elite club member that have drank out of Danny Ricciardo's racing boots, you know. But yeah, you know, it's great. It really is good to see Ricciardo. Like, hopefully it's a big moment to win any Grand Prix, but especially at one of the classics like Monza, and to do it in the way that he did. Because I'll be honest with you guys, I thought at the start, I fully expected both Hamilton and Verstappen to legit pull away from these guys. Both Lando and both Ricciardo, but it was completely the opposite. And the thing was, okay, they're not really holding them up, at least not too much. And I mean, they seem pretty pacey. And it was just, it was a question after a while. It's like, yeah, I think if they can stay in front of Lewis and Max, that these guys are going to stick in there. They've got something to say. And, you know, to build on that, I hope that this is for Danny Ricciardo, obviously kind of struggling throughout the year and, you know, kind of been in a little bit in no man's land the last, I guess, 2.5 years, that maybe this is the race, maybe this is the weekend that he finds his mojo and becomes Danny Ricciardo again, because they got something good going on at McLaren, despite Andreas Seidel and Zach Brown saying they still got work to do, which obviously you would expect. But I think the bigger picture is, I think going down the stretch here over the last 8 races to come, this Ferrari McLaren battle in the constructors, I think is going to be pretty juicy, because you know, like Charles and Carlos finished 4th and 6th. I mean, decent amount of points. So it keeps the constructors gap to, I think, about 15 points or less between the two of them. So it's going to be good fun watching it over the next 2.5 months or so.
Daly, you made such a good point earlier as well, kind of referencing back. And I think a lot of Tim's listeners are pretty accomplished Formula One fans. They're probably familiar with the fact that this team, McLaren, went through a bit of a dark spell. If you flash back 5 or 6 years, you have that really unsuccessful short-term marriage with Honda. You had the whole fiasco and falling out with Ron Dennis when he was being forcefully extracted from that team. But really, that dark period's much longer than that, because you have to flash back to 2007, the whole Spygate situation with Ferrari, the fact that they were effectively the Mercedes works team, and that relationship broke down so badly that Mercedes just went off like, you know what, we're done with you. We're just going to buy our own team. It got to the point, of course, where they wouldn't even supply McLaren with power units. McLaren was forced to go to Honda. That didn't work out. So it feels like for really the first time in maybe 8, 9, 10 years, they're in a really great place. And I have a question for both of you, because I'd love to know where you attribute that credit. Is it Zach Brown? Is it Seidel? But I just think as well that from a marketing perspective, if you work for McLaren and you're responsible with going out and forging sponsorships and marketing collaborations, this team, forget the money, that the windfall that could potentially come through the Constructors' Championship. This has to be one of the most valuable IPs in the sport right now. If you look at the prominence of McLaren gear online. They're following the collaborations they're doing with streetwear manufacturers. This team is absolutely skyrocketing from a trajectory perspective. I'm talking both from a branding perspective and a culture perspective. But Mark, Tim, what was the turning point for this team? Was it personnel? Was it the power unit decision? How do we go from that dark spell with Alonso 5 or 6 years ago to where we are now?
I'm going to say something. I'm going to throw it to Tim. So I'm going to say that I'm going to put a lot of this at, with Zach Brown and what he's done to build this team. But I'm going to put this to Tim. Maybe you've got some more insight and context that you can lend this. But do you think that perhaps the results that we've seen at McLaren and the work that Zach has done is perhaps that he's a bit of an outsider? I mean, obviously he's got a long history in motorsport, but perhaps the fact that he's not, quote unquote, F1 guy, and he kind of came in from a different sort of parallel, road in motorsport, if you want to call it that.
There were opportunities when, Zach could have gone and worked for Formula One. The McLaren gig that did come up for him, he ended up going with that over other opportunities that, in my mind, I thought he probably should have taken at the time, because McLaren was nowhere to be found. And why would you want to try and almost resurrected a dying team? And it seemed like a lot of work, and it just didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And then you had that Honda partnership, like you guys were saying, that really failed miserably. Mm-hmm. I think once that happened, I think it's at that moment that Zach decided to just take control of this team's destiny by going out, getting Andreas Seidel, who ran the Porsche LMP1 program to a ton of success, and has that experience of building a team that wins. And a lot of these things, most of the time, the success starts off of the racetrack. Like we've seen with basketball teams, if the front office is not good and it's very fragmented, the team is not going to be any good at all either that's on the floor. It's the same thing with racing. If your team is not gelled together and you don't have a legit leader who's willing to toe the line and do what needs to be done to put people in the proper places or let people go, you're not going to have success. Having Andreas Seidel, I think, come in has been huge for this team, because ever since he did come into McLaren, they've started to have a lot of success. And I think Zach kind of maybe unlocking the leash from Andreas Seidel and just saying, you're team principal, go and do whatever you want to do. I'm going to sit on the sidelines and I'll handle the business aspect, the marketing side of things. I'll take care of our shareholders. I'll deal with all that. You take care of the cars, the drivers, the teams, getting the technical side of this thing nailed down, get us back into the fight, and I'll take care of the rest. And I'll keep you safe, and I'll keep everyone else away from you so you can just focus and do your job. I think Zach Brown doing that is what's really turned this McLaren team around, for sure. 100%.
Yeah, very much like Hamilton said. I mean, it really was a long and slow and steady decline that they went through before they really hit rock bottom. And Tim, I love that comparison with the NBA, because you're talking to two basketball fans that lived and experienced the Vancouver Grizzlies experiment up close. So we can vouch firsthand how a bad front office and management can ruin the chemistry of a team. So nothing further to say on that front.
Yeah, and I'm a big Raptors fan, so like, hey, I get it. I love basketball too. Another driver who was out there who did a great job today and scored their best results of the season, actually ever in Formula One, is Lando Norris. He was fantastic today, guys. Fantastic.
Yeah, I don't really have anything more to say about Lando. I think it's well known, at least on our podcast, that I'm a big Lando fanboy. I mean, I think for me, like Lando's big statement was a couple of years ago in France at Paul Ricard, when I think he picked up like a hydraulic issue, like within 5 or 10 laps from the end of the race. And he basically manhandled that car like all the way around to either just finish in the points or maybe just missed it. And I thought, okay, this guy, he seems for real. And I think he's just gotten better and better and better. And I mean, just watching him, especially in the sprint race on Saturday, just having Lewis behind him the whole time and not being fazed by it, I was just really impressed. And I've just, every time I watch Lando out there, I really love what he's doing. And I think it's going to be exciting to watch him develop and watch him as his career moves forward.
Lando's right now, just for a little bit of context, because I'm always big on context, sitting on 132 points. He only scored 97 all of last year. And of course, last year was a bit of a truncated season, but he's now only 9 points behind Valtteri Bottas for third in the Drivers' Championship, which is absolutely incredible. And I think he brings value in a couple of ways. One, he's demonstrated that he's a great teammate. We saw the relationship with him and Carlos. I think the relationship with him and Ricciardo it's not been poor, but I think Ricciardo, I don't think he's been in his element, and I don't think he's been himself. He struggled with confidence, as Tim suggested a couple of minutes ago. I think that's going to change really, really effectively right now. But I also just think that from a marketing perspective, he speaks to the younger demographic. He's accessible. He's on Twitch. He's a gamer. He's got a social media team built around him. He is the perfect asset that you would build a team around. And to then be able to complement him with a charismatic driver and somebody with the personality like Daniel Ricciardo is fantastic. But he has a very real chance of finishing third in the Drivers' Championship this year. And what's even more exciting about this is if you look forward to next year and you look at the gains that McLaren's made, there's no reason to assume that Red Bull's success and Mercedes' success will carry over next year, simply because everyone's effectively starting over. You're going to carry over the power unit, but everything else is going to be new. And if I'm going into that new era and I can build my team around any specific driver, I'm not so sure it's necessarily going to be Max. Maybe it's Lando. If I'm starting a new team today, maybe that young driver for me, it's maybe Charles, maybe Lando, but Lando's been phenomenal. And we talked earlier this summer as well about, hey, who's going to be that next young driver that breaks through and scores a champ or scores a podium or scores a race win? My money was on Lando. He didn't get it today, but it's going to come. And maybe it happens this year because they're just putting together some really great performances. And Tim, to your point, organically, that team is gelling. Culturally, they're good. But also just from an execution perspective, their aero decisions seem to be reliably good. Their pit stops are good. Everything just seems to be working right now.
You know what else is working? Or who else was working today? It was Valtteri Bottas, because he had his work cut out for him, guys. He started all the way in the back, taking a penalty, new power unit, taking penalty of whatever it was, 20 grid spots, I believe it was. Like, absolutely ridiculous. But this guy had his work cut out for him today, and he came off a big win during the sprint race on Saturday. Honestly, even if, Max and Lewis, did or didn't crash out, I never expected him to at least crack the top 5, let alone get a podium.
I know. Bottas, I think, is doing some very interesting things. I think that he's making a real statement. Just, hey, I might not be continued in Formula One with the best team, but, I'm still a good driver. I'm going to, he's hooking up with Friedrich Vasseur, where he had some successes earlier in his career before Formula One. So who knows what they're going to try and do with that project. But I think he's just making a bit of a statement to everybody out there in the Formula One world that, I'm better than a lot of people give me credit for. And I've been quite impressed what he's done the last couple of weeks. I thought it was kind of interesting last week in Zandvoort when he was told to back off up that fastest lap, even though Lewis got it eventually, but he still set the fastest lap, I think 2 laps from the end. I thought that was kind of interesting too. I don't know if that was a bit of a, flipping off the pit wall or something with a bit of tension there, or just he backed off and just he had so much speed and momentum that he still nabbed it. But I think that I think he'll leave a good legacy when he leaves Mercedes at the end of the season. I think that finally he's getting a multi-year deal, which he really deserves. I mean, obviously he wasn't the guy to be like the long-term solution to be the number 1 driver at Mercedes going forward, but I think it was a great weekend for him. I think he was impressive. I think that's the only word for it.
I completely agree. And I like your point too about his legacy. I think if you look at the press on Bottas the past 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's never been particularly generous. It's been very, very critical. It's been very abrasive. But I think if you're Toto Wolff and you're honest, he's done everything you could possibly have asked him to do, which is you've let Lewis through to win his titles, and he's done more than enough to help you secure 4 or 5 constructors championships. And I think he's doing almost enough this year, or he's doing enough this year to potentially help you score another one. And to your point, Mark, as well, what I saw from them this weekend was relaxed approach that I haven't seen from him in a long time. And if you look at him in the interviews this weekend, his voice, his tone, his cadence, it was relaxed. He was flowing. He felt comfortable. And typically when he's been interviewed over the past 6, 12, 18 months, they're tight, short, frustrated responses. But today he was psychologically, mentally in a different place. And I think what we saw in qualifying and what we saw during the sprint qualifying session was a driver who's just in a totally different state of mind. To your point, he now has security. Maybe it's not with Mercedes, but he's got 2 years of security up ahead. And I think he's just in a really great place. And mistakenly today as well, I'd made a comment to my wife about the fact that, well, look, a lot of his pace today is based on the fact that he has a fresh power unit. And her point was like, well, he didn't have that power unit during sprint qualifying or qualifying. I'm like, that's a great point. He was carrying this pace all weekend. So it was a bit of, we talk about redemption for Ricciardo, a bit of mini redemption for Bottas. And I know he hasn't scored a race win this year, and maybe he doesn't, but I think this was the performance that he needed to put out there just to remind people that I am a perfectly capable, world-class Formula One driver. And I was very, very happy for him to be on that podium. And I'm excited to see what he can do for the rest of the season, given the fact that he's now got this peace of mind because he has a 2-year commitment with the team for 2022 and 2023.
Yeah. A driver that I think who's had a bit of a struggle over the past few races is Carlos Sainz, and Ferrari hasn't brought their new power unit upgrade, which apparently it's supposed to be pretty spectacular, but we'll see what happens with Ferrari once it gets to the racetrack. But as for Carlos Sainz, I don't know, guys. He hasn't had a very positive past few races. Has had a lot of crash damage in really silly incidents. It's not like he's even, binning these cars while on the limit. And so I have to wonder what's going on there, because I feel that, Carlos up to the summer break had a pretty positive experience at Ferrari, but now it doesn't seem like it. It just feels like things are going the wrong way for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think over the past, since we came back from the summer break there, it seems like he's lost his way a little bit. It's like the break came at the wrong moment. And for whatever reason, he's just, up top mentally struggling to get it in gear again. Mark, what do you think?
I agree. And you have to be careful, because if you simply look at the race classifications year to date, sometimes they can be misleading, right? Like a 10th or a 7th place finish might look good on paper, but when you actually look at the times and the delta between him and the drivers in front of himself, there's a lot more there. And Tim, you're absolutely right. Like, he finishes the first half on an absolute high. He finishes with a podium finish in Hungary, his 2nd of the year. We had conversations all summer about, is he going to score a race win first, or is it going to be Lando Norris? And the momentum that Lando had built up in the first half of the season, with the exception maybe of Belgium and a softer performance at at Zandvoort, which I think is more attributed to the aero setup of the car. I think Lando's in a very different hemisphere. And one of the predictions that I had very boldly made during the summer break was that we were going to see, especially with that forthcoming Ferrari power unit upgrade, we were going to see a surge from Ferrari, and they were going to leave McLaren in the dust when it came to the Constructors' Championship. I don't know that I necessarily feel that way anymore. Now you've got this 10, 15 point gap between the two teams in McLaren's favor. They leapt over Ferrari with their performance today. So I don't necessarily know what's going on with Sainz. I know Leclerc was happy with his performance today, but I'd be a little bit more concerned about Sainz and try to get an understanding of what's changed in his racecraft from the first half of the season to the second.
Taking a look at the sprint qualifying, I put a poll out on my Twitter on Saturday following the event, and it did quite well, but the poll questions were, what do you think of the F1 sprint race? And it was, love it, it's okay, meh, I hate it. And guess which one was the leading vote getter?
Meh?
Meh.
F1's trying to do this for the fans. Well, the fans are telling you something, right? And I think that this sprint race, qualifying, whatever the hell they want to call it, I think if they're going to want to have success with it, I think they need to start thinking about putting it racetracks where drivers can actually pass. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it was. I understand that maybe, and Mark's kind of coined the term of having majors at certain Grand Prix, and you can understand why you do it at a track like Monza or a track like Silverstone, because they're the classics. They've been on the calendar forever. But Silverstone, obviously, there's more opportunities to pass, whereas we didn't really see very much passing all weekend at Monza. So maybe, like you say, maybe you try to find, if you're going to do it 3, 4, 5 times a year, whatever it is, that try and put it at tracks where we're going to see some more passing. I don't know, maybe Austria is one of them where, there's more opportunities and we see passing going to turn 3 or whatever it might be, right? So, yeah, I must admit that this one kind of snuck up on me. I knew in the back of my mind for weeks and weeks and weeks that we were going to see sprint qualifying. I actually kind of spaced out on it the last week or so, just with other things catching up. And when Mark reminded me, he's like, oh, hey, we got sprint qualifying coming up this weekend. I was kind of like, oh, yeah, wow, this is great. And then I have to admit that I enjoyed it, but I felt afterwards that I really left with a sense of wanting more. Like I really didn't feel kind of like blown away by it. I was like, okay, well, we had a safety car during sprint qualifying because Pierre went off and they had to pull him out of the gravel and everything like that. So that was kind of interesting, but I don't think that's the kind of main talking points I want to go away from this. So a lot of work to be done, in my opinion.
Look, I give Liberty credit for being flexible and trying new things. They don't want to be the Major League Baseball of the motorsport world. They want to try new things, but make no mistake, and this isn't designed to be a criticism. The whole concept of sprint qualifying is to inject more financial value into Liberty. If you look at 2019, so 2019 was the last full season that they raced prior to the pandemic. Formula One earned about $2 billion. At least that's what they filed with the Securities and Exchanges Commission in the US. Of that $2 billion, about $600 million came from TV money, $600 million came from race sanctioning fees. So by introducing this concept, you can potentially increase both of those pies, because if I'm Liberty, I'm in a position right now where it's going to prove more and more difficult to earn incremental revenue, especially if you're already at a race calendar of 23 races. Maybe you go to 25, which I know is allowed by the Concord Agreement, but this whole concept is designed to increase value, because now we can go to the race sanctioning teams and say, hey, if you want to host a Formula One race, you can do it for $30 million, or I can give you a major, quote unquote major, with sprint qualifying for 35. And then you can go to your TV network partners and say, look, nobody's tuning in to watch practice on Friday, but now you get qualifying on Friday that everyone's tuning into, plus you get sprint qualifying. So I like what they're trying to do. I think what's worn on me is this concept of sprint qualifying. Call it what it is. It's a race. Have qualifying on Friday. Let that set the stage for the race on Saturday and the race on Sunday. Do away with this nonsensical sprint qualifying session. That's what's bothering me about this. To me, the 3 events, and some of our listeners had made the point that, well, you want to kind of weave a narrative between the 3 of them. But to me, I don't necessarily like that narrative. And if you're going to do a session on the Saturday, just be honest. It's a sprint race. Call it a sprint race. Throw some extra championship points out there. Make it a little bit more meaningful. But to me, I like that they're trying something new. I just think there's some work to do here, and they need to massage it a little bit more.
I agree.
Like Total Wolf says, not fish, not meat. Moving on. So Russian Grand Prix is coming up in 2 weeks' time. And this is a race that's been absolutely dominated by Mercedes, like we had said previously in the show. Since 2014, it's Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, Valtteri Bottas, Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas. So coming into Russia, if Max ends up taking an engine penalty, I mean, guys, this is going to be domination by Mercedes. This whole Russian Grand Prix weekend.
Yeah, it's hard to go against history when you look at those stats, right? It's just like until somebody else comes and proves otherwise, I just can't find myself. I can't bring myself to bet against Mercedes on this one. They've just been too good there for too long, and I just don't see it changing. I mean,
if this season's been anything, though, and it's been a lot of things. Like when we reflect back on 2021, there's going to be a lot of talking points and a lot of things to unpack. But if this season's been anything, it's been unpredictable. So you're right, Tim. Like we have every reason to think, especially since Bottas has got that fresh power unit, especially since it's a track that's designed to cater to the way that those cars are set up from a power unit perspective, a narrow perspective. There's every reason to think that they should be successful. I don't know that they necessarily will be, but again, if I was putting my money on anybody, I would think that you're probably going to see 2 Mercedes drivers on the podium. And to your earlier point, Mercedes desperately needs Russia to get themselves back into this drivers' championship. And it really, in a lot of ways, is Lewis's saving grace at this perspective. And I assure you that coming out of the summer break, Mercedes had Russia circled on the calendar because they had to know that going into Zandvoort and Belgium and Italy, they probably weren't going to win 2. They definitely weren't going to win 3. But if they could come out of those 3 races within a stone's throw of Max in that driver's title, they'd have a shot. And Russia gives them that shot, that not just to get closer to your point, Tim, but it gives them a chance to leapfrog potentially Max in the drivers' championship and build on their constructor. So I think my money would probably be on seeing a couple of Mercedes cars on that podium, but we've seen some surprises this year. So I wouldn't be shocked if it was very different.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, and like Mark Daly said, you can't argue with history and statistics. I mean, you just can't, right? So I think coming into Russia, this is the Mercedes race to lose. Like I was saying, coming into the Italian Grand Prix, I felt that was also Mercedes' race to lose. Coming up, we have 7, maybe 8 Grand Prix left on the calendar. We have Russia, then Turkey, then the USGP, then Mexico, then Brazil, and then we have one in November that's a TBA, which I believe is going to be Qatar. They just haven't announced it. It'll be a night race from what I've learned. And then you have Saudi Arabia, and then finishing everything off at Abu Dhabi at that new circuit, which Mark Hamilton, you are going to. That sounds awesome, by the way. And do you guys think, though, that they're going to be able to finish off this calendar with the way, things have been going?
Yeah, that is the $64,000 question, right? And I think I couldn't help but wondering if perhaps that was maybe a lingering thought in, what happened today in Monza, just, knowing that, time is running out. We have 7 confirmed, probably 8, but then maybe we lose, maybe we lose some of these races just because of the pandemic, that we just don't know. And I think that, just to go back and build on your point just now about, Russia, Tim, it's the right time or the right place at the right time for Lewis and for Mercedes. It is just, somewhere that they've always run really, really well. And points are always at a premium, but now this year even more so because we just don't know how many races that we have left, but it will be interesting. Looking forward to all these races coming up, except for maybe the Russian Grand Prix. Saudi is obviously an unknown. The redesigned and rebuilt Yas Marina circuit is going to be awesome. The U.S. Grand Prix is always usually pretty interesting. I love that turn up into turn 1. Turkey was great to see on the calendar last year from a bit of a nostalgic point of view. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun going down the stretch here. And yeah, especially when I think now we're starting to see it on the constructor side. Mercedes is starting to pull away from Red Bull in the constructors. And if Lewis can have a good weekend in Russia, then we might start seeing like some good indicators of where the season is going to end up finally.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that we're at a point right now where we look at this calendar and there's 7 races kind of locked in, maybe 8, because I think, Tim, you're right. I'm confident we'll see a race in Qatar at Losail. I think, though, that even if we shed another race, for instance, let's say we lose Brazil, which I think is probably the race that we're most at risk of losing. Mm-hmm. It's not particularly difficult for Formula One to slide another race into Bahrain because you're already going to be in that region. Bahrain is a 30-minute flight from Qatar. It's a 30-minute flight away from the UAE and Abu Dhabi, and it's ultimately an hour away from Jeddah. It's also, and this is something that I didn't realize until recently, Jeddah was never supposed to join the calendar until 2022. It was an insurance policy that Formula One put on the calendar this year in the event that they started losing races. So they actually went to the race organizers and said, hey, how quickly can you finish construction on the corners and get this track done? Can you do it for December? And they're like, well, make it happen. But ultimately, that was itself an insurance policy, and ultimately it was a smart thing. So maybe we end up where we see 3 or 4 races in the Gulf region to conclude the season. But again, ultimately, we don't know how many races are left. And I think every championship point might be worth 1.2, 1.5 points in the grand scheme of things, because we could very well lose. We could lose Turkey. We could lose Brazil. And I don't want to speculate too much. I don't think we're going to lose COTA simply because I think for political reasons that the Texas government wants to keep that one on the calendar. But I think we could lose a race somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
I agree. Sorry, Tim. I was just going to say that I fully agree with Mark. I'm hoping that we don't. I was just as you guys were chatting, I just looked at some of the pandemic figures, and the case counts are actually dropping in Brazil. So
that's fantastic.
We're not going to be there for until the middle of November. So hopefully, fingers crossed that that trend continues and we're able to hold the race there. But certainly, as Hamilton was saying, that there are options in the Middle East at chequered. Qatar seems like that's the name that's been thrown out there the most. So that would make logistically the most sense. And, I kind of, as much as I'm interested to see that race in Qatar, I actually really kind of enjoyed racing on that outer circuit in Bahrain last year. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, me too. And I hope that's something that does come back, right? I'm excited to see Qatar, though. I'm excited to see that circuit, and I'm excited to see what they've done in Abu Dhabi with the new track layout that will be there for Formula One when they get there this season. And I'm really stoked for that one, because that is a race that has put me to sleep for quite a long time. So I'm looking forward to that one. Quickly, just want to touch on F1 Fantasy. So for the Racing Pod Fantasy Challenge, top 5, we've had a change at the top, but Lando's squad has taken over the lead. In second place from Canada is Racing Pointless. From Indonesia, it's F1 team Tim Principal. In fourth from the Philippines, it's Speedy Racing Team. And from Canada, it's Connor Team 1. That is rounding out the top 5. Remember, there's a prize that is being given away for the winner of the Racing Pod. Marks, thanks very much for coming on the show, guys. Really appreciate it. You have fun?
Oh yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah,
really loved
awesome.
it. It's always good talking with you, Tim. And we love your insight and your experience as a racing driver. Always adds a different level to the conversation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
coming on tonight.
I just want to say thank you so much, man. Whenever we've had you on our show, the feedback is always phenomenal. You bring a perspective that neither of us or any of our other guests can bring, simply because you've got both the media side, you've got the on-track experience. So when you dropped us a message a couple of days ago and said, would you like to join? It was obviously a no-brainer, and we were ecstatic to be here.
Yeah, I love chatting with you guys, man. It's always a good time. So, hey, Mark Daly, tell them what you guys have got going on.
So we currently drop a weekly show. You can search us up in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you download and enjoy your podcast. Just search us up, Scuderia F1 Pod, just like Ferrari. And you can find us on Twitter. We're pretty active over there, and that's at Scuderia F1 Pod. And we have a weekly show drops every Thursday night or Friday morning if you're in Europe, or because it drops quite late on Pacific time. And then also we recap the show or the races every Sunday night. And if not, then we usually do kind of a casual after hours, kind of laid back show on Monday nights as well. Go through the mailbag, and so we're putting out a fair amount of content. Let's put it that way.
And Mark Hamilton, you guys have been doing Twitter Spaces lately. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Spaces sessions on Twitter have been phenomenal. We've had a couple sessions where we've had close to 100 people trying to break down the doors and get in there. Sometimes it's a little bit more casual and it's kind of more of a core group of people, but it's really given us the opportunity to get to know our audience. And what I would say, and this goes back to a conversation you and I had 2 years ago, is the audience is new to Formula One. They're incredibly incredibly excited. They're incredibly hungry. They soak up everything. They're looking for information. And I think we've kind of coined the term Generation Drive to Survive or Generation DTS. And that represents a big chunk of our audience. And we love it. And we're just trying to help nurture and help encourage their passion for Formula One. But I'll never forget a comment that you made 2 years ago, which was, hey, this sudden surge of new fans is awesome. F1 just better not lose them. And by that, you mean they've got to change the product. They've got to keep it exciting and they've got to create parity. And I think we're inching closer and closer to that with the 2022 regs.
Can you tell the listeners where they can go to get more of Twitter Spaces from both you and Mark Daly?
Yeah, so typically what we'll do is we'll host our Spaces sessions on Thursday nights. We typically record at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll typically light up our Spaces sessions somewhere around 6:30 to 7. So all you have to do is follow us on Twitter. You'll get the notification right away. We open it up to everybody, so everyone has the opportunity to talk. We try to make it as inclusive and inviting as possible. No fighting, no bickering, no criticisms. It's fun, it's light, it's informational. But we'll typically light up the sessions around 6 to 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Usually run them for a couple of hours. We've done a couple on race day as well, but typically we try to keep a uniform structure. But yeah, just follow us on Twitter. You'll get the notifications about the Spaces sessions. And we think it's a lot of fun. And I think our listeners' feedback has suggested they believe it is as well.
And for those listening out there, if you want more from Mark Daly, you can get him at Mark Daly F1. And if you want more from Mark Hamilton, it's at Mark in Van City. Guys, thanks again for coming on. Really do appreciate it. Check out their podcast, Scuderia F1 podcast, guys. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. And for all of you out there listening, if you want more TSN Racing Pod, you can get it at tsn.ca/TSN-racing-pod or wherever you get your podcasts. You want more from me, you can get me on social media at Tim Horaney. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you all soon.